Welcome back, Exiles. For those of you interested in playing a Sorceress or not quite sure what you're going to play during early access release, this video should give you some insight and hopefully help you make up your mind if the Sorceress is right for you. Just as a public service announcement, any of this information that I cover today could change. We don't know anything for sure until early access releases. So all of this is currently just based on speculation and information that's been released so far. We'll be covering the Ascendancy choices, spell skills, support skills, persistent buffs and meta skills, the passive skill tree, or at least what we know of it so far, and we'll go over some general build ideas. I've also included a graphic of a staff that was just released last night. This is something that requires level 90, so this is an endgame staff. But if you're familiar with gear in Path of Exile 1, this is a pretty impressive staff. For starters, we'll cover the Chronomancer. This looks like it's more of a defensive build based on the points that we've seen and that have been released so far. Jonathan recently mentioned that this was one of the builds that he felt was most broken. We'll hopefully get some more detail as to whether or not the Chronomancer has some more offensive abilities. Here's Jonathan providing an overview of the Chronomancer.
Alternatively, you could become a Chronomancer and command time itself. She literally has the ability to stop time with Time Freeze. Not only that, but she has many other time manipulation abilities. Using Temporal Rift, she can teleport back to a previous location, resetting her life and mana back to what it was. Or with Time Snap, she can reset all her cooldowns and cast all her spells again.
Also, they've released the Stormweaver. This one is definitely a much more offensive build. I did notice in the video from the live stream that the elemental storms didn't really seem like they did a ton of damage, but perhaps they just needed to have some additional supports added to them to be useful.
As a sorceress, you could become a Stormweaver, a master of the elements. Tempest Caller causes elemental storms to be summoned each time you do a critical hit with a spell. With Strike Twice, you can stack 2 copies of Shock for more damage, and going deeper into the tree, you can make all your damage types apply Shock. Make a Shock build from any skill. The Sorceress bends the elements to her will, using them to unleash devastation on her foes. This classic spellcaster weaves a flurry of elemental magic from afar. The elemental skills have everything you might expect and more. Fireballs, icy explosions, lightning storms, you get the idea. Each spell is unique and has many different ways to build and combo with others, even between different elements. For example, Flame Wall conjures a burning line that not only damages enemies, but also empowers all projectiles that pass through it. If you place a wall and fire lightning sparks through it, they'll gain extra fire damage.
Going over the cold spell skills first, I've listed Comet and Ice Nova here as 2 notable cold skills that are really good for getting out of dodge. Comet, for example, is a skill that you see in the videos that launches the comet in the air and pushes you back away from your enemy. And then Ice Nova is a great ability that knocks enemies back on hit. Eye of Winter is a spell that is worth noting because it inflicts critical weakness on hit, which increases your chance of dealing critical damage. Frost Bomb is also a great cold spell that will debuff the enemy's life regeneration rate, as well as applying a debuff that reduces the energy shield recharge rate. This also inflicts cold exposure, which applies negative cold resistance. Frostbolt and Cold Snap are both some cold spells that have synergies together. Frostbolt is a slow-moving ball that goes across the screen and leaves a wake of chilled ground. It will also explode on colliding with terrain. Cold Snap is a skill that can be used in conjunction with Frostbolt to detonate any enemies that were frozen by it. Getting into lightning skills, it wouldn't be the same if we didn't mention Arc, a classic favorite for any PoE 1 fans. Arc is an ability that will chain itself to multiple enemies, and it deals significantly more damage to the first enemy that it hits. I've also included Ball Lightning and Lightning Conduit. Ball Lightning is another slow-moving projectile that repeatedly shoots out bolts of lightning at nearby enemies. It's worth noting for Ball Lightning it has a 750% more chance to shock. And a good spell to use in conjunction with that is Lightning Conduit. Lightning Conduit will call down a lightning strike to all enemies in a cone in front of you, and this deals significantly more damage to shocked enemies, but then will remove the shock from them. Also, these are a couple of duration spells here. Lightning Storm and Orb of Storms. Lightning Storm has a significant chance to shock, and it will apply a much larger shock because it will shock enemies as though dealing 400% more damage. Orb of Storms is an orb spell, which you can only have one of at a time, and it will fire a bolt anytime you use a lightning spell near it. Last but not least, we've got Spark. Spark has been profiled in a number of the video footages that we've seen recently. Spark is a very popular skill and does a significant amount of damage. Next up, we've got fire skills. I've noted Fireball and Flame Wall here. Flame Wall is particularly useful with any elemental skills, as any projectiles that will pass through it deal added fire damage, and Fireball is a projectile skill. Firestorm and Solar Orb are both duration spells for fire. Solar Orb is also an orb spell as well, so I don't believe you're going to have Orb of Storms and Solar Orb out at the same time. But Solar Orb will last for 10 seconds and causes burning damage to any monsters nearby. And Firestorm, also a duration spell, definitely less duration at 6 seconds, but will rain fire down upon your enemies. You can only have one Firestorm active at once. And wrapping up the active spell skills, Rolling Magma is a very popular skill from Path of Exile 1. This bounces along the ground and will do damage to any monsters that it hits. Moving on to support skills, a couple of notable support skills here are Arcane Surge and Energy Barriers. Energy Barriers actually looks like it's a little bit like Wicked Ward was in Path of Exile 1. This will allow your energy shield recharge to begin immediately and will not be interrupted by damage for 3 seconds when you're stunned. Here's some additional useful support skills. I've included Execute, Inevitable Critical, and Wild Shards. Execute looks like it's a lot like the Punishment Curse in Path of Exile 1, where supported skills deal significantly higher damage against enemies that are on low life, which is anything less than 50% life. Inevitable Critical is a support skill that will increase your chance of dealing a critical strike until a critical strike is dealt, and then that chance will reset. Last but not least, we've got Wild Shards. That's a skill that has a 20% chance to fire 8 additional projectiles around you in a circle. This is going to be very handy for clear. Here's a couple of cold-specific support skills. Biting Cold will apply cold exposure, which reduces the cold resistance of your enemies. Deep Freeze increases the duration of your freeze on enemies. Also, a couple more cold support skills here. Frozen Vortex will deal 30% of overkill damage per second, lasting up to 3 seconds. It will basically leave a vortex on the ground. And we also have Glaciation, which increases your freeze buildup. It allows you to freeze enemies faster. Moving on to fire support skills, Fiery Death will cause killing blows from supported skills against ignited enemies to have a 60% chance to cause that enemy to explode. Ignite Proliferation and Ignition are both good skills to use in conjunction with Ignite. Ignite Proliferation will cause your Ignite to spread to other enemies, and Ignition will significantly increase your chance to ignite. Some noteworthy lightning support skills. Neural Overload causes this skill to electrocute primed enemies on hit. I believe this will cause enemies to be locked in place. Shock Siphon will allow you to recover a portion of your energy shield when the supported skill deals a killing blow to a shocked enemy. This is a great skill during map clear for energy shield recovery. Lastly, for lightning support skills, Shock Proliferation will cause shocking hits from supported skills to have a 50% chance to also shock enemies in a 2.5 meter radius. This is a pretty large radius. And Stormfire, which is technically a fire and lightning support skill, this will prolong your shocks when they're inflicted on ignited enemies. I also wanted to include some key support skills you want to keep your eyes out for. Cold, fire, and lightning penetration. These all will significantly increase your cold, lightning, and fire damage. Moving on to persistent buffs. This will cause your spells to gain 5% damage as lightning damage for each 100 mana that you have, but will also cost significantly more mana. A spell that looks like it's going to work well with Archmage is Mana Remnants. This is going to cause enemies that you kill that have been shocked to leave behind a mana remnant. And picking up those remnants are going to grant you mana, as well as allow you to overcharge your mana, which will give you double its normal maximum. Malice is another way to increase your critical strike chance by inflicting critical weakness on enemies. Sigil of Power is a spell you can drop on the ground and stand in. This will grant more spell damage the more mana that you spend while standing in that area. Moving on to meta skills, Elemental Invocation will provide energy when you freeze, ignite, or shock an enemy. This will allow you to trigger spells and consume energy. It will also allow those spells to trigger multiple times. Cast on Critical is another meta skill that will grant energy every time you deal a critical strike, and will trigger all socketed spells once you reach maximum energy. Cast on Shock, Freeze, and Ignite will all be extremely handy for a Sorceress. This is going to allow you to generate energy based on any time you shock, freeze, or ignite an enemy, and will allow you to trigger spells based off that.
The Sorceress can also take advantage of powerful trigger gems. For example, you could grab the Cast and Ignite gem and use it with Firestorm. As you ignite enemies, a counter will go up in the top left corner. When it's full, a Firestorm will automatically be cast at the enemy that was ignited. There are 25 active elemental skills. By endgame, you'll be firing off projectiles left and right as you rain down elemental storms on your foes.
Here's some of the nodes that we know so far on the passive skill tree. I've got Path of Winter and Critical Overload with an arrow drawn where you can assign those skill points. Ash, Frost, and Storm, Wildstorm, and Interfaith are all in that general area on the tree. And Energize is on the top right. That will be particularly useful for any trigger skills that spend energy. Unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot of information as it relates to the passive tree, so hopefully more information will come in the days ahead. Here's a few other useful nodes at the beginning of the passive skill tree. You can see Path of Storms is right next to Path of Winter. This is a lot like the Path of Exile 1 skill tree that has increased fire, lightning, and cold damage respectively, right near the beginning of the tree. This part of the tree actually looks very similar. Lastly, we'll wrap up with some general build ideas. Stacking critical hits and damage is a popular playstyle and will lead to maximizing your damage. Also, keep your eyes peeled for opportunities for mana stacking and mana regeneration with the Mind Over Matter Keystone and the Archmage support skill. This could provide additional tankiness for the Sorceress, as well as significant increase in damage. Try making sure to balance defense and offense, as the Sorceress is known as kind of a glass cannon, and building for defense is still going to be very important. Especially once you die, you fail a map, you want to minimize that as much as possible. We don't know much about any build-defining uniques so far. Keep your eyes peeled for any uniques that have any particular synergies with the Sorceress. And last but not least, we've got Attribute and Int stacking. This will allow you to do things like increase your damage for every so many intelligence that you have. I did see on a video recently that there was at least one notable on the tree that I believe increased your damage by 2% for every 10 intelligence that you have. So looking to build an int stacker when it comes to the Sorceress could be a good play. This also works well in conjunction with mana stacking, as intelligence typically also provides some base mana. That'll wrap us up for today. Hopefully you found this overview useful and it helps you decide what to play on early access release. Please comment and let me know below if you're going to be playing a Sorceress or if you're interested in seeing a video like this for other classes. Thanks for watching.